Hi, I'm Bob Birchard.
And I'm Anthony Slide, and we're talking about The Rains Came.
20th Century Fox production A200, made in 1939. The year some people have claimed is the biggest year or best year in the movies. There were 10 Academy Award nominees that year, including Dark Victory, Gone with the Wind, Goodbye, Mr. Chips, Love Affair, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Ninotchka, Stagecoach, Of Mice and Men, The Wizard of Oz, and Wuthering Heights. The Rains Came was not nominated for a Best Picture, but it was nominated for Best Art Direction, Best Film Editing, Best Musical Score, Best Sound Recording, and it won the award for Best Special Effects.
About which obviously we'll be talking quite a bit later on.
It's somewhat appropriate that as we sit down to record this, that it's raining cats and dogs outside in LA, and we're setting a record for rainfall that has stood since 1887.
As we watch the opening scene in the film, it's perhaps interesting to learn how the film was originally scripted to open. In the script as of July 1938, the film was to open with shots of the city of Ranchipur, including a snake charmer, a native woman washing clothes in the river, the Untouchables, and a movie theatre showing of all things the gold rush. It was then to cut to the hospital and its dispensary, and the introduction of Major Safti and Miss MacDade, described as a grim-visaged Scottish nurse. However, by the script of October 5, 1938, the opening was as we see here. Darryl F. Zanuck, the head of production at 20th Century Fox, basically didn't want a story about India. He wanted a story about a group of people in India. And this is how he felt it should begin.
And yet, I think it's interesting, Tony, that very subtly woven throughout the film and the story is a sense of India and its politics, past, present, and future.
Yeah, I mean, I think the political situation in India as depicted in the film is rather sort of benign and patronizing. We're not so much shown the British controlling India, but we are shown the Maharaja and the Maharani as the leaders of Indian society and the people who decide who will succeed them running the country.
Of course, British rule in India is somewhat simplified in our minds today. We tend to think of the British ruling India, but in fact, the British only directly ruled small parts of the country. They worked in collaboration with local leaders through many of the provinces. Ranchipur, as described or set out in this Louis Bromfield story, is an imaginary province. It does not exist in reality.
But it is in fact based on the province of Baroda, which is in the northwestern part of India. It's basically close to where the border of Pakistan is now.
Brandy and soda? Yes, thanks. No, I don't think I better. I may have to operate this afternoon. Oh, just a drop. Steady as the hand, see? Well.
Now, The Rains Came was, according to studio publicity, was budgeted at $2,500,000, but it cost considerably less than that. It was in production from April 17, 1939 to June 22, 1939, and it had a final negative cost of $1,371,600. It was released on September 15, 1939, and its premiere engagement was at the Grauman's Chinese Theater in Hollywood. The domestic gross was $1,656,100. Foreign gross was $985,100, for a combined worldwide gross of $2,641,200. The net profit was $461,200. It was reissued twice, in 1943, where it went on to gross domestically another $194,600 with a profit of $118,200, and a second reissue in June of 1952 with a domestic gross of $116,000 and a profit of $51,000.
We might add at this point we're listening to George Brent make a speech against fascism and appeasement, which, I think very typical of the writing of Philip Dunn and also the philosophy of Darryl F. Zanuck. You have to bear in mind that the film was in fact released 2 weeks after the start of World War II. Here in America, Americans tend to think World War II started with Pearl Harbor, but in fact it started on September 1st, 1939 with Hitler's invasion of Poland, and 3 days later France and Great Britain declared war on Germany. Bromfield himself was very much opposed to appeasement. In fact, he argued that it was shameful the British government, led by Chamberlain, sort of had tried so much to appease Hitler, to agree to whatever Hitler wanted.
The American girl and her mother from the mission. They're not stopping here, are they?
Mother, please don't. I'll die if you do.
Oh, don't be silly.
Here we see Marjorie Rambeau as the mother and Brenda Joyce in her first film. Brenda Joyce today is perhaps best known as the second Jane in the Tarzan series. She was hired as a model. There was somewhat like with the search for Scarlett O'Hara, there was a search for the new leading lady for The Rains Came, and they hoped to generate a lot of publicity from that.
It's interesting, by the way, that her real name was Elizabeth Lebo, and it was Clarence Brown who gave her the name of Joyce, because Clarence Brown was married to the former silent film actress Alice Joyce, so he wanted to honor his wife by honoring Elizabeth Lebo's with a new name.
Now, why did I say I'd go? You didn't. She did.
As you mentioned, there was quite a lot of publicity in terms of casting the part of Fern. A great many sort of actresses were tested, supposedly 58 in all. 2 of them that we know of are Lorraine Day and Jean Parker.
Thank you, my dear. Oh, you know Major Craddock and Mrs. Palmer, of course. How do you do? Mrs. Hoggett Egbury. How do you do?
Darrell F. Zanuck came up with a list of casting suggestions for the film. Initially, to play Fern, he wanted Phyllis Brooks. To play Lord Eskeff, he wanted Reginald Owen. To play Major Safti, he wanted either Charles Boyer or Cesar Romero. To play Ransom, he wanted Ronald Colman. To play Lady Eskeff, he wanted Marlene Dietrich. And to play the Maharani, he wanted and got Maria Uspinskaya.
Interestingly, Cesar Romero was actually announced for the picture, although he does not appear in it.
Well, of course, he'd be under contract, presumably, to Fox at this time anyway.
This is Jane Darwell, who went on to win an Oscar for her portrayal of Ma Jode in The Grapes of Wrath.
She just does it to annoy me. Does what, dear? Sits there.
I think the film makes strong use of character players. We've already mentioned Marjorie Rambeau. We're shortly going to see Laura Hope Cruz as Lily Hoggett Egbury. And, of course, Henry Travers playing Jane Darwell's husband.
It's a fairly high-powered group of character actors, and amazing because the roles are relatively small. Marjorie Rambeau actually began her career as an actress in Alaska as a teenager, working in the mining camps, and led a rather rugged life in the theater. She had appeared in A Modern Hero in 1934, an earlier film version of a Louis Bromfield novel.
No, sirree. We've got a gentleman's agreement.
Jane Darwell was a local Los Angeles area stage star who got into films early in the silent era, making a feature debut in 1914.
No. What do you think you are, a 2-year-old? Working after hours in this heat.
Henry Travers, many of you will remember as Clarence the Angel in It's a Wonderful Life.
I had to keep one of my pupils after school. He'd been throwing spitballs. You'll be staying to tea, of course.
Oh, he can't. He's going to the party. Oh, better hurry up.
Darrell F. Zanuck wasn't the first Hollywood producer to be interested in filming the novel. David O. Selznick had acquired the page proofs prior to publication in September 1937. However, when he submitted it to the Production Code Administration, the Hollywood self-censoring body, he was warned that it would be impossible to film it because of illicit sex and adultery. Strangely enough, when Zanuck submitted his script, the Production Code found almost no problems whatsoever.
No, only about 5 million people.
It's reported that Zanuck actually paid $53,000 for the screen rights.
It's so seldom out here one meets anyone from one of the real county families. Of course, you've heard the Eskers have just...
One of the things I think that probably took some of the sting out of the property is there's a great deal of humor, especially in these early scenes, even though we're dealing with fairly adult situations. A mother trying to palm off her daughter on a rather ragged nobility, the rather tawdry life of Myrna Loy we'll see shortly. The film is steeped in a great deal of humor, and the characters have a lot of fun with the situations.
Particularly, I think, George Brent as Ransom.
Mr. Ransom, this is our little girl, our little daughter, Fern.
How do you do?
I've wanted so much for you two to know each other.
Brent is a very interesting character. He's not very well remembered today, but he was a very successful leading man for many, many years.
I beg your pardon?
It'd be difficult to call him a star, but he played opposite many of the great leading ladies of the day. Ruth Chatterton, who he was married to briefly, Kay Francis, Betty Davis.
Snakes have been a bit trying.
He's a very fine actor. He was born in Ireland in 1904. His parents died when he was relatively young, and he was sent to live with relatives in America. He returned to Ireland and actually fought with the Irish Republican Army briefly, or was a dispatch carrier. When things got hot, he was actually an assistant to Michael Collins, and when Collins was murdered or assassinated...
Not by the British, I may add.
Brent was smuggled back out of the country and came back to America and pursued a career in acting. He had worked as an actor in Ireland briefly with the Abbey Players.
Oh, I hope I'm not keeping you from your guests.
I think it's sort of interesting, actually, we have George Brent here sort of espousing conservative causes, the morality of Queen Victoria, and here in a previous life he was a member of the IRA.
What sort of things? That you're a drunkard and a bounder and a remittance.
Although in later life he sort of poo-pooed his earlier endeavors and said that the war is going to go on forever. He tried to live in Ireland in later years and found it impossible. He said he'd chipped his Rolls Royce over there to drive, and the Irish thought he was an English nobleman and scratched the doors of the car.
You see, Mr. Ransom.
Well, there are, in fact, we're getting into a political issue here, but there are, in fact, of course, two IRAs. The IRA that was involved in the liberation of Ireland from the British in 1921-22, and the current IRA, which has no connection to the original body.
I need your help. I'm in trouble.
We might mention, in fact, that Arthur Miller, of course, gets credit for the cinematography, but he wasn't the first cameraman to work on the film. That was Burt Glennon, but he became ill and was subsequently replaced.
That's why I had to come to you. You see,
Perhaps I can help you. Is there a man mixed up in it?
No.
Darrell Zanuck was very concerned about getting approval from endless numbers of consultants. He sent the script to the India office in London, and it responded that this is a quote, magnificent story, which, quote, shows well-run, efficient state government as object lessons other backward states in India could learn from. The India office, however, did suggest that the English Lord Escott might be toned down somewhat in terms of his characterization. Fox also flew in Dennis Mallory, who'd served at the US consulate in Bombay in March 1929, to advise on production. And they also brought in a British major, George Remington, and an Indian, Hussein Nasri, to consult on the film. They also brought in another Indian, Ateullah Durrani, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing his name, in September 1938, and he sort of advised on costuming and architecture. He actually was quite concerned that the character Major Safti did not have a Hindu Brahmin name. He also was very much concerned about Lord Escoff's behavior. He felt that the character was definitely displeasing to the English, and he suggested that perhaps they should turn Lord Escoff into a Lebanese businessman, which would be far more appropriate to his behavior.
Miss Simon and I, we were just talking about the theater.
Oh, yes, of course. I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's a messenger here from the palace.
Oh, yeah?
From Her Highness, Ransom Saab.
Now, the story that Rains came out of Louis Bromfield's travels to India in 1932. Bromfield was born in Ohio and published his first novel in 1923.
He'd actually begun his career in 1920 with the City News Service and Associated Press as a journalist. He actually had a major success with his first novel, The Green Bay Tree, and for his third novel, Early Autumn, in 1926, he won the Pulitzer Prize. From the mid-1920s to the late 1930s, he was primarily based in Europe. And as Bob mentioned, he first visited India in 1932 as the guest of the Maharaja and Maharani of Baroda.
He came back to the States and settled in Ohio in late 1930s as war clouds were gathering in Europe, and established an experimental farm. When Darryl Zanuck bought the novel The Rains Came, he also brought Bromfield to Hollywood and put him to work adapting or writing an original screenplay which would become Brigham Young Frontiersman.
This was actually not the first time Bromfield had been to Hollywood. Goldwyn had actually signed him to a contract in 1929-1930, but Bromfield complained that he really had very little to do. There was only actually one film that came about as a result of that contract, and that's One Heavenly Night with Evelyn Leigh, for which Bromfield provided the original story. It's also interesting, by the way, that apparently Bromfield was one of the people who worked on the script for Dracula with Bela Lugosi. He certainly was involved in an early version of the script, although I'm sure that he had nothing to do with the film as released. The first film to be based on a story by Louis Bromfield is actually a silent film from 1925 titled Bobbed Hair, starring Mary Prevost. When you look through the films of the 30s, and actually the 1940s as well, there's a surprising number based on Louis Bromfield's work. A Modern Hero, for example, in 1934, which was directed by the great German director G.W. Pabst at Warner Brothers, that's based on the 1932 Louis Bromfield novel.
Now it's interesting too with Fox, with all the stars they had. Myrna Loy was borrowed from MGM, the director Clarence Brown was borrowed from MGM, and George Brent was borrowed from Warner Brothers to appear in The Rains Came.
Apparently, in return for loaning Tyrone Power to MGM for Marie Antoinette, MGM gave Fox not only Myrna Loy but also Spencer Tracy for the film Stanley and Livingston. So at this time, Tyrone Power is a far bigger star than either Myrna Loy or Spencer Tracy.
How do you like the Maharani?
Tough egg, isn't she?
I call her the last queen. You know, nowadays when queens do everything in their power to look like...
Myrna Loy began her professional career as a dancer, and her first job was in one of the prologues at Grauman's Egyptian Theater on Hollywood Boulevard in 1922.
Can I just interrupt while we see this, the camera panning down the menu? This actually was added to the script by Clarence Brown, who for some reason felt it was sort of important, although it's hard now to know quite why. I'm sorry, Bob.
In her early career, Myrna Loy was noted for playing Oriental sirens. It's hard to imagine, since she's best known today for her All-American Wife roles in the Thin Man series and in Mr. Blandings Builds His Dream House with Cary Grant, roles like that. Supposedly, she was fired by Darryl Zanuck when Zanuck was head of production at Warner's, didn't think she had any talent. She later became friends with Zanuck, but during production of The Rains Came, she said, "We were personal friends, but that was different from business, and he didn't have much regard for my talent." He called her into the office and said she wasn't really up to snuff on The Rains Came. When she asked what he wanted her to do, he said, "Well, just show up for work."
Yeah, he seemed to question her interpretation of Lady Eskeff, and I really don't think it could be better, so it's hard to understand why Zanuck was so bothered by her performance. I mean, one realizes that Lady Eskeff is a bit of a trollop, but at the same time, she must come across as relatively sympathetic because of her behavior later in the film. The best way to describe her is perhaps as a worldly woman with a heart.
£10,000 for that chestnut stallion and 2 mares.
This film, by the way, was supposedly Myrna Loy's 99th, although, of course, many of her films in the early days had consisted of nothing more than extra work or bit parts.
Your Highness strives a hard bargain. I mean to have that stallion. Name your price and I'll meet it, whatever it is.
Nigel Bruce, on the left, will be best remembered as Dr. Watson in the Basil Rathbone Sherlock Holmes movies. H.B. Warner, probably his best-known role was as Christ in the 1927 Cecil B. DeMille production, The King of Kings. He started his film career in the teens, and by the 30s he was working as a character actor primarily. He was also in It's a Wonderful Life in later years. He played the druggist.
Thank you.
Warner had just played a role in Frank Capra's Lost Horizon, in which he played a Eastern character, and this film sort of references that in a way to make his character sort of a character shorthand so that audiences would be familiar with it right away.
Well, that, I suspect, was bought from a street peddler in Naples. And this?
It's sort of interesting, by the way, that many years earlier, while a student at Venice High School, Myrna Loy had posed for a statue titled Ambition. And while they were making The Rains Came as an obvious publicity stunt, she agreed to pose for a new statue, The Fruition of Ambition, which was to be erected a few feet away from the original under the sponsorship of the Myrna Loy Fan Club of Venice, California.
7 years ago to paint the Maharaja's portrait. Been here ever since.
Myrna Loy never won an Academy Award, although she did eventually receive an honorary one in 1991.
What brought you all the way up here to Ranchipur?
The Maharaja's horses. Albert's very fond of horses. The only thing he is fond of, except money.
And have you become fond of money, too?
Passionately.
Used to be just excitement.
You can't live on excitement alone.
Getting back to cinematographer Arthur Miller, he began his career as an assistant to Fred Balshofer in 1909. The first film he shot was Heroine of 76 for the Rex Company in 1910. He was also one of the cameramen on the 1914 serial The Perils of Pauline with Pearl White. He went on to win 3 Academy Awards for How Green Was My Valley in 1941, The Song of Bernadette in 1943, and Anna and the King of Siam in 1946. His autobiography, co-written with Fred Balshofer, is called One Reel a Week, and it's a loving story of the early days of the business. His lighting techniques are also described at some length in Charles G. Clark's book, Professional Cinematography. Miller was born in Roslyn, New York in 1895. His career was cut short in 1951 when he contracted tuberculosis, and he gave up his career as a cameraman, although he remained active with the American Society of Cinematographers for many years. A recurrence of the disease in 1970 led to his suicide. It was not widely reported at the time, but he did commit suicide based on his deteriorating health.
You haven't changed.
Have not.
Earlier I mentioned Darryl F. Zanuck's original casting suggestions for the film. Among the actresses vying for the role of Lady Eskeff were Kay Francis, Constance Bennett, Binnie Barnes, Ina Clare, and, extraordinarily, Tallulah Bankhead, although maybe she might have been not too bad in the role. Playing Ransom, Basil Rathbone was at one point suggested, as well as Herbert Marshall, and it was even hinted that they might bring over William Powell from MGM again to play opposite Myrna Loy. For Safti, Raymond Navarro was considered, but by this time he was reduced to starring at Republic Pictures, and I think probably sort of would not have had the box office potential.
Of course, the reason for that probably was that he had starred with Myrna Loy in 1932 in The Barbarian, in which he played an Arab character. Mm-hmm. It would be like lightning striking twice, I guess. Speaking of lightning.
Yes.
One of the nice things about the film is the way the rains are integrated into the film. The remake, The Rains of Ranchipur, which was made by Fox in the 50s, holds off the rain until the very end of the film. It changes the plot somewhat and becomes much of a love triangle in a way that sort of reduces the story to just a pulp novel. Now this scene is a direct lift from Clarence Brown's 1926 film Flesh and the Devil with Greta Garbo and John Gilbert. He repeated it here, and it gives a beautiful visual treatment of this past and fleeting current relationship between George Brent and Myrna Loy.
Well, it hints at the strong sensuality between the two players as well.
And also, along with the scene with the necktie that's about to come up, suggests what they were doing off stage while the rains were pouring. Maria
Maria Uspensky was obviously the first choice for the Maharani, but it's interesting that the other actress suggested was also Russian, and that was Nazimova. I don't know why sort of 20th Century Fox had this idea that Russians should play Indians. Maria Uspensky actually claimed that she'd learnt Indian deportment from the Grand Duchess Marie of Russia, but how the Grand Duchess Marie of Russia knew Indian deportment, I don't know.
Who's the pale copper Apollo?
Major Safti.
Not bad.
Now, this is the first hint of Myrna having a roving eye. We know that she's had a past relationship with the George Brent character, but immediately after her apparent assignation off stage, she is smitten by Tyrone Power as he sits and plays cards at the table.
I've been looking for you everywhere. You ready to go?
Whenever you are.
I'm ready now. I think I'm going to be ill. It's this confounded climate.
I'm sorry, Albert. Mr. Ransom tells me there's a doctor in Ranchburg.
Is this one of the few times that Nigel Bruce played a non-likable role?
Well, I guess you could say that, although, you know, he's somewhat sympathetic. He's certainly a difficult personality, but...
I suppose the idea is the character is out of its depth here.
Yes. And we'll see a bit later that he's had to put up with a lot in his marriage to his wife.
Hello.
Well, what are you doing here?
I've been away from home. I'm never going back.
Brenda Joyce was promoted at the time as a typical American girl, in fact described as the new spirit of Hollywood, not exotic, but very much down to earth. And in fact, in real life, I guess she was like that. She went to the film's premiere with her longtime boyfriend, Owen Ward, who was studying to be an accountant, and in January 1941, she married him.
Which apparently led 20th Century Fox to essentially graylist her for the balance of her contract, and she was given less than stellar roles from then on.
Of course I have. Don't you see? Then everyone would think that...
I think she's very serviceable. I don't think she's a great actress, but she certainly, you know, seems very competent. For her test at the studio for the role, she was actually directed by Tom Moore, who is not known as a director, but had been fairly well known in silent films as a leading man.
Don't you dare laugh at me.
Oh, listen to me, Charlie. What's this? You're soaking wet.
I tried to find out what happened to Brenda Joyce. She is, we assume, still alive. And last heard of in the 1980s, she was running a Catholic resettlement office for refugees in Monterey.
She did appear on a couple of episodes of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood in the early 1970s on PBS.
Seems to have been a very sensible woman. This is not, by the way, the first 20th Century Fox film to have an Indian theme. A couple of years earlier, they had filmed Wee Willie Winkie with Shirley Temple, set in India.
Now change into these. Find plenty of towels in the bathroom. Give yourself a good rub down. Oh.
Clarence Brown started his career with director Maurice Tourneur as his assistant and took over the direction of The Last of the Mohicans in the early 1920s when Tourneur became ill. Clarence Brown then signed with Universal and made several very stylish films for that company, including Smoldering Fires and The Goose Woman. He signed with MGM in 1926 and spent the bulk of his career there. He was a very good personal friend of Louis B. Mayer. But In later years, he said his favorite filmmaking experience was at 20th Century Fox on The Rain Came. He said that at MGM, all the department heads fought with the director over control of their various areas, whereas at Fox, all the departments were in service of the director. Tourneur was known as a very visual stylist, and Brown inherited a lot of that. You'll see a lot of silent film technique in the film, using visual means to tell the story or forward the story.
I'd be a fool if I didn't. You're lovely, Fern. Not nearly so much of a child as I thought.
That kiss seems to be right up to the time limit set by the censors of the day.
There's somebody there, behind the blind.
John!
And talking of the censors of the day, the Production Code Administration, they demanded a change in this character, the servant's name. He's referred to here only as John. In the novel, he is John the Baptist, but that was considered derogatory to religious groups, and so, as I say, the name had to be changed simply to John. Strangely enough, the only other major concern that the production code had with The Rains Came was the fact that there were scenes showing animals drowning during the flood sequences, and they didn't think this was appropriate, even though apparently there's no evidence that any animals were actually harmed during production.
Peaceful. May I come and see you once in a while?
Of course.
See, that's important because I guess I love you. If I didn't, I wouldn't be going home now.
The Rains Came was Louis Bromfield's most popular novel. It was translated into Italian, Swedish, Slovakian, Hungarian, Norwegian, Danish, Finnish, Romanian, French, Polish, Czech, Spanish, Dutch, Hebrew, Hindi, and German. There were in fact 400,000 copies printed in German alone. The Chicago Tribune described it as far and away Bromfield's best novel. The Saturday Review of Literature pointed out it is enjoyable and long. It was, in fact, a very long novel. It ran almost 600 pages, so that is why perhaps the film seems rather fragmentary at times. It's just simply not possible to cram everything into a 100-minute film.
Although at the time, in the 30s, Hollywood studios didn't seem to mind having a rather novelistic approach to films.
Well, don't you think back then that actually audiences had probably read the novel?
Well, certainly a segment of the audience, not everyone who went to see the film, but...
And I think probably more people, say, back then had actually read a novel on which a film is based compared to, say, today.
That's probably true.
Do sit down, Major.
You're very kind.
Frankly, it's rather a treat for me to have someone to talk to. I expect it will be deadly dull now that Albert's going to be ill. I think this tea is cold. I'll send for some more.
No, don't bother. I like it that way.
Sugar?
No, thank you.
What would you prescribe for a patient about to die of galloping boredom?
I imagine the Maharani will see to it that you're properly entertained.
How?
The Rains Came was Tyrone Power's 17th film and his 14th for 20th Century Fox. It had been preceded by Second Fiddle with Sonia Henney and was followed by Daytime Wife with Linda Darnell. So obviously Tyrone Power is being paired with all the major Fox contract stars.
I wonder if he'd mind if I...
2 weeks into production, Tyrone Power married Annabella, the French actress. They didn't have time to take a honeymoon. In fact, they married in the afternoon, and Tyrone Power returned to work on the set the following day.
Although Myrna Loy in her autobiography says that Tyrone Power was very nice and very much like he is his character in this film. She said there was nothing romantic going on between them, although she wouldn't have minded, but she said he was married to that damn French woman at the time. While this scene was being shot, apparently they brought in some horses that were not used to working in pictures, and Myrna Loy's horse bolted and ran through the studio, ran away with her, and finally stopped on the steps of the commissary at Fox. Cowboys got on their horses and raced to try to rescue her. It was a wonder, she said, that she wasn't thrown or killed.
What's this? The insane asylum?
No, this is the Maharani's music school.
Oh.
Major Saab, Mama Saab, how are you?
20th Century Fox had sent a sound crew to Baroda in India to try and get background music for the film, but they subsequently hired Lal Chand Mehra to adapt Hindu melodies. He worked with David Buttall for the 20th Century Fox music department, stripping the Hindu music down to its fundamental notes.
You like music?
Oh, I have a box at Covent Garden as a matter of course. Frankly, I like this sort better.
Mr. Das, is Gemma Singh here today?
Oh, yes. This way, please.
One of the things I find rather remarkable about the film is the sort of threading of political and social themes. They don't get in the way of the melodrama, but they're there for those who are aware of the political situation. We have George Brent, who reminisces about the glory days of the British Empire and Queen Victoria. He represents the tired old guard who will still be a stepping stone into the new India. Tyrone Power, of course, represents this new India. The Myrna Loy character is an impediment. She represents the corrupt Western world, but she also transcends that corruption somewhat and helps Power move into the role that he will assume at the end of the film.
Do you know the song?
Yes. The words are traditional, but the music is improvised, free variation.
Here, of course, we're being introduced to the old India through the Hindustani love song that Tyrone Power and Myrna Loy are listening to. It's titled the Vasanti Ragini.
It's a bit florid.
Power was from a long line of actors. His great-grandfather was an Irish comedian. His father, also known as Tyrone Power, was a stage actor of some prominence and also worked in films as a character actor. His children have also gone on to careers as actors.
Of your beauty. Your hands hold my life.
Lal Chand Mehra, responsible for the music, also appears as a Hindu priest in the Maharaja's death scene, chanting in Sanskrit from the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindu Bible.
In your heart, my love has found a home. And
it's interesting, in fact, that while we have quite remarkable Hindu music here, that at the same time Dowlev Zanuck had Matt Gordon and Harry Revel write a pop song titled The Rains Came, which was promoted but didn't do too well.
And also, unless it's just heard as incidental music.
It's not heard in the film itself, no. I mean, happily, the lyrics are quite dreadful. I'll quote you them. The rains came from the sky, the moment you said goodbye. A cloud burst, deep, deep inside. I think we'll stick with the Hindu music.
Matt Gordon was an interesting character, very heavy set, and wrote songs in films with a number of collaborators, including
Harry Revel,
of course, and
Harry Warren.
And Harry Warren. Gordon also was a favorite of Zanuck and appears in several films in cameo roles.
Yeah, in fact, Matt Gordon and Harry Revel also wrote a theme song for Dowlev Zanuck's previous disaster film in Old Chicago.
What sort of a woman is Lady Escott?
Lady Escott? Why?
The Major brought her here yesterday to show her the hospital. He's out with her again today.
Zanuck is known for his ability in molding scripts. He started his career as a writer, self-published a book which he used to open doors at Warner Brothers, and he wrote for Rin Tin Tin in the silent era and then became head of production. The interesting thing about Zanuck is at Fox he seemed to have this incredible ability to deal with literary material and bring out the best in scripts. His own scripts at Warner's in the late 20s don't show any evidence of any great story sense. He wrote the most melodramatic of things, like In Old San Francisco and Noah's Ark. You know, it's hard to imagine. I guess he grew into the role of producer and studio head.
I'm always very impressed whenever I go through his story files, the fact that he does seem able to read an entire script in a matter of 2 or 3 hours and visualize exactly how it should look on screen. His story notes are very impressive, really. I mean, he analyzes and deconstructs the script and can tell the screenwriter exactly what is needed.
Well, and I think the evidence is on the screen. You know, at the time, MGM's films were considered the creme de la creme of the industry, and yet over the years, the Fox films seem to have worn much better than their reputations at the time.
Personally, I prefer 20th Century Fox films to MGM. MGM films always have a certain pretentious look to them. Fox films seem somehow more down to earth.
Now, Mr. Benner's dinners always begin at the fashionable 8:30.
Here you've been having adventures.
I'm a victim of circumstances.
If you didn't drink so much, you wouldn't always be getting into trouble.
Well, at least my weakness is wine.
What do you mean by that?
You know what I mean.
Listen to who's moralizing. I suppose that comes from philandering around missions.
I never philander around missions. And I don't philander around hospitals either.
Don't be catty, Tom. I do believe you're jealous.
You know perfectly well I'm not jealous. If there ever was anything between us, we both know it's finished now, dead and gone.
Then why do you come here and act drunk and dictatorial?
Because I see something happening I don't like.
Stop talking like a copybook. It's not becoming.
When are you leaving?
We plan to go tomorrow, but with Albert ill...
You're too ill to travel?
No.
Then why don't you go?
You are a beast, aren't you? Tom, we've double-crossed almost everyone in the world. Let's not start on each other.
I don't want to interfere, really.
I don't know how many people are aware of the fact, but Louis Bromfield was a very close friend of Humphrey Bogart and his third and fourth wives, Mayo Meffo and Lauren Bacall. And in fact, Lauren Bacall and Humphrey Bogart were married at Louis Bromfield's Malabar farm on May 21, 1945, and Louis Bromfield was the best man. Humphrey Bogart, in fact, had starred in a 1940 film, It All Came True, based on Bromfield's 1936 short story, Better Than Life.
Now, when the rains came, Nigel Bruce, as we see, is ill with high blood pressure and perhaps other maladies of traveling. In the remake, Rains of Ranchapur, the character played by Michael Rennie is mauled by a tiger in a tiger hunt. The relationship between the Indian doctor and the husband is much more pointed in terms of their battling over the affections of the Lana Turner character, who takes the place of the Myrna Loy character in this film.
Get out!
Yes, my lord.
Come here! Close those. Suppose you'd like me to die of malaria.
No, my lord.
Here again we're about to see an interesting way around censorship as Nigel makes a mark in his little black book of his wife's transgressions.
Well, also, I think, emphasizing just how many lovers she's had as well.
Yes, but in a tasteful and subtle way.
By the way, a lot of people have insisted that The Rains Came was tinted and that the rain scenes were tinted blue. There's absolutely no record of this, and my feeling is that perhaps the 1952 reissue, which I'm told was issued in sepia color, might have actually tinted the rain sequences blue.
Well, it's quite possible. A lot of films were tinted in this period, although there's no real record of it these days. Fox did sepia tinting, certainly in a number of pictures, notably Stormy Weather.
It's awfully kind of you to come, Lady Esker. Of course, we are terribly upset about Lord Esker, that he can't be with us tonight. Hello, Ransom.
How do you do?
I believe you know almost everyone from the palace. You know Rashid Ali Khan, of course, and...
The fellow in the Tales is Joseph Schildkraut, who first gained screen fame in the 20s, working with Cecil B. DeMille in The Road to Yesterday and several other films. He was the adopted son of the Jewish Yiddish theater actor Rudolf Schildkraut.
And of course he's best known for his role on stage and on screen as Otto Frank, Anne Frank's father in The Diary of Anne Frank. Standing next to George Brent is Mary Nash playing Miss MacDade. She actually was a major New York stage actress of the period. She made her dramatic debut in 1903 with Ethel Barrymore in Alice Sit by the Fire. She came to Hollywood in 1934, appearing in a dozen or so feature films.
Although she'd acted in at least 2 silent films in the teens for Pathé.
Her sister was Florence Nash, who was better known as a comedian.
Well, of course not.
You wouldn't feel relieved if I left?
As a matter of fact, I'd miss you. I've enjoyed your company very much.
I was afraid you'd take that attitude.
What attitude?
Lying to me.
But I just told you
Don't
that...
bother to explain. You know perfectly well what I'm thinking. And I know what you're thinking.
The associate producer of The Rains Came, who in the days before credit inflation would actually have been the line producer responsible for the day-to-day production, was Harry Joe Brown.
Who, of course, here and on all the 20th Century Fox films gets credit only as associate producer.
Brown was born in 1890 and studied law, worked as a newspaperman and also as an actor. He got into films in various capacities, supposedly worked in the electrical department on Erich von Stroheim's Foolish Wives in 1922. By 1924, he was producing westerns with Fred Thompson, a former military chaplain and an Olympic athlete who went on to become a very popular western star in the 20s. Brown sort of alternated between big budget pictures like this, The Rains Came, and westerns. In the 1950s, he teamed with actor Randolph Scott in a very, very fine series of western films.
We're now, of course, seeing some of the spectacular special effects created by Fred Serson. Now, it's interesting here, this is the first time we learn that there's actually a dam above the city. There's been no reference to it earlier. We've not seen it. This had given the studio some concern how to suggest the dam's presence rather than suddenly abruptly having it burst. It had even been suggested that Lord Eskeff should be shown to have actually sort of been responsible for building the dam and using shoddy construction techniques. There was also a scene in the script at one point which would have an Indian worker on a ladder inspecting the front of the dam for cracks, followed by a shot of an Indian engineer in a tower telephoning the city to warn that the dam was about to break, as it just has.
Ultimately, I presume it was felt that it was unimportant. The flood is more of a symbolic thing in the story, and the mechanics of how there came to be a dam and its weakening just aren't that important to the overall impact in the story. It's somewhat subtle, but you can see a slight increase in contrast and graininess in the special effects scenes. Obviously, they're multi-element matte shots.
Now, this sequence here between the butler and Nigel Bruce bothered Darryl F. Zanuck quite a bit. He really felt that it was cliched to have the butler, played by Herbert Evans, turn upon Nigel Bruce. But surprisingly, he allowed it to stay in the script and in the film. We obviously should talk a little bit, if not quite a lot, about the special effects. It was estimated that 10,000 gallons of water were used for each shooting minute, the equivalent of 40 inches of rainfall per day. And because the main water system in Los Angeles did not carry enough water, the studio had to build a reservoir holding at least 100,000 gallons on the lot.
Of course, there's probably some exaggeration there because all of the spectacular water tumbling would have been done as miniature work and may not have required nearly as much water as they suggested.
Yeah,
there's certainly a lot of water in the tanks when they're rowing around in the flooded land.
We might mention the studio publicity claimed that 2 million gallons of water were released. 14 cameras were used to photograph the dam bursting and its aftermath. And in all, 33 million gallons of water were used. Now, that does sound a little high, even to me.
They inflated the budget by nearly twice in the publicity releases.
So maybe closer to 15 million gallons.
In later years, Fox seems to have been pretty good about their statements in the press about what their films cost. They were pretty close to reality, but in this film they exaggerated considerably.
They also claimed that 24 buildings were destroyed and more than 3,000 extras, along with 40 elephants, sort of appeared. The elephants were stampeding, the extras were just behaving the way extras do. This is making an interesting point here that Mr. Banerjee, who had adopted Western attire and tried to pass himself off as a Westerner, now reverts to ethnic type when faced with a disaster. He shaved his head and adopted Indian clothing.
I'm curious where Fox Publicity came up with the 100-day shooting schedule, because the film was shot over 9 weeks, and you can't get 100 days into 9 weeks the way I divide it.
Well, I don't know. I think if you're in publicity, you can do anything. Actually, my favorite publicity story has to do with the situation on the set was so dangerous that famed movie animal man Curly Twyford refused to let his trained raven Jimmy work in the earthquake sequence with Myrna Loy, Power, and George Brent. So Jimmy's stand-in, Coco, was substituted.
And of course, as far as I know, we don't even
see the raven. We don't see a raven anyway.
The 40 elephants is another interesting thing, because I don't think you see 40 elephants.
I think there's 3 of them.
Yes.
Apparently, the scene with Brenda Joyce on the boat was actually the first shot that she made for the film. And she had a lot of trouble because she didn't know how to row. And every time she put the oar in the water, the boat would go round in circles. I'm actually wondering why she hasn't changed her clothes since the night she visited George Brent.
Well, this scene seems out of order to me, because we go to a scene later on, just after this, where Brent is in the palace, and it doesn't seem to reference this scene at all. But, of course, the story of the boat spinning around is another publicity thing, I'm sure, because they would have had the boat towed. She wouldn't have had the row under her own power.
Or there's somebody behind it pushing it.
It's time for several trips. I'll take you first.
I'm all right.
No more paddling for you, young lady, until you've had some rest. Now, come on.
I don't need any rest.
Come over here now and lie down.
The studio system has been disparaged many times over the years, but it's amazing to think how quickly these films were made and released. From first day of principal photography in April 1939 to final release in September of 1939. Very short time schedule for such a big film. Today, it would be a year in post-production before a film would get out. Of course, studios at the time were making many more films than they are today.
been to your house, they wouldn't believe the truth.
Don't you worry about that.
Mother pretended to be sore, but I don't think she was really sore.
We should perhaps mention the work of Fred Serson, who was responsible for the special effects. As you already mentioned, he was nominated for an Academy Award, and in fact, that was the only Academy Award that the film won, was for Best Special Effects. It went to Fred Serson and to E.H. Hansen, who doesn't actually get credit on the film itself. It is interesting that this film beat out both Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz for special effects. Fred Serson's other sort of nominations in the same category were for The Bluebird in 1940, A Yankee in Oxford in the RAF in 1941, The Black Swan in 1942, Crash Dive in 1943, which he actually won, Wilson in 1944, Captain Eddie in 1945, and Deep Waters in 1948.
Here's another example of this sort of symbolic characters in the film, as we've talked about Joseph Schildkraut, who we saw earlier in the White Tyrone Tales, now has reverted to his earlier...
Well, to his ethnic roots.
Yes, and to the old India.
Don't you care enough to find out what's become of your friends?
Oh, don't be a fool.
1939 was the first year that the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences gave the award for special effects, although the previous year they had given a special effects award as an honorary award for the film Sworn of the North. Fred Serson had joined Fox in 1918 and was with the studio through 1951 when he retired because of ill health. He died in 1962. Fox named either a lake or the water tank in his honor. I did check with 20th Century Fox, and there is neither a water tank nor a lake at the studio today named the Fred Serson Lake or Water Tank, so we can only assume that it disappeared with the Century City development.
Well, of course, yes, Century City covers what was the most extraordinary backlot in Hollywood. I got a chance to tour it. My dad was bidding on the earth moving to build Century City, and he took us out there one Sunday afternoon, and it was amazing. There were 5 Western streets, 2 New York streets. There was a tank where the yacht for Adventures in Paradise, the TV series, was moored at the time, and some pillars for one of the abortive versions of Elizabeth Taylor's Cleopatra that was started at the studio before it finally shot in Europe.
Come on in, I'll get you some coffee. Thank you.
I'm sure some film buffs listening to us are wondering why we're giving credit to Fred Serson and not mentioning Louis J. Witt. Because if you read the publicity releases sent out by the studio at the time, they all refer to Louis J. Witt being responsible for all the special effects, including the earthquake and the flooding. Now, this is very puzzling, and I've only recently discovered that Louis J. Witt, in fact, had been the head of the special effects department at the old William Fox Film Corporation before it merged with Darrell F. Zanuk's 20th Century Pictures to become 20th Century Fox. And I think the publicity department, nobody bothered to tell them that there was suddenly a new special effects department with a new man in charge named Fred Serson, so they just sent out all the publicity crediting the old guy, Louis J. Witt.
Well, and of course, in those days, it was not uncommon for the department heads to get credit for work that was actually done by others.
Well, in the case of In Old Chicago, both Louis J. Witt and Fred Serson worked together on the film.
It's interesting that when 20th Century merged with Fox and really became the first among equals, that so much of the old Fox employees were kept. Fox maintained 2 studios, the Westwood studio, which is their headquarters today, and also the old Fox studio at Western Avenue and Sunset, where they made their B pictures, the Charlie Chan films and the other films that helped pay the mortgage for the company.
It's interesting, by the way, that the old Fox studios at Sunset and Western had actually been the Thomas Dixon studios, built by Thomas Dixon, the man who provided the source material for The Birth of a Nation. And it was here that Thomas Dixon produced what was his basically only major film, but certainly his most astonishing production, The Fall of a Nation, in 1916.
You've come back.
I'm sorry. I lost your boot.
Achedyoyang dayoyang kledyo shoshevachaha nitya sarvagataha sthanur chaloyang sanatanaha ajayate mriyate va kadachinnayang bhutva bhavata va nabhuya.
The Fox Film Corporation goes back to 1915 and was an outgrowth of William Fox's interests in theaters and film distribution. William Fox operated the Greater New York Film Rental Company and fought the Motion Picture Patents Company in the teens. In 1914, he formed a company called Box Office Attractions, which released the films of other producers, and that gradually changed to become the Fox Film Corporation the following year. Fox was organized largely by production units based around directors, and although that structure changed somewhat when 20th Century took over in 1935, where the associate producer had a lot more to do with the day-to-day production. A lot of that structure remained, and as I mentioned earlier, Clarence Brown found it much more conducive to picture making, a lot easier to negotiate than the MGM system where the department heads ruled every phase of their particular concern.
Close the door.
Maria Uspensky as the Maharani seems to have a rather pronounced Jewish accent. I do find it sort of interesting, actually, that, of course, there are no actors of color in this film, that all the Indians are basically played by American actors in what might be called blackface, really.
Yes, they used a lot of Bolamania or Bolarmenia as...
Yeah. I mean, if this were a film, say, about African Americans and we were watching white actors playing the roles in blackface, it would be outrage. But somehow we sort of accept the fact that Tyrone Power, Joseph Schildkraut as Mr. Banerjee, maybe less Maria Uspensky, but all these actors are not Indians. Now, I can understand the fact, of course, that probably were very few, if any, Indian actors available to Hollywood at the time. But even so, I think it's sort of remarkable.
I proclaim a state of emergency to exist in Ranchipur.
Here again is a fairly subtle use of actors to describe the political situation in India, where we see the police, the local police are Indians and the army are British soldiers.
As we've already said, Tyrone Power is representative of modern India. He's of ancient Indian or Rajput stock, but he was educated at Johns Hopkins University. In a way, he isn't Eurasian, but he does come across as a Eurasian.
The rest of you know your duty. Ransom, I want you to stay. Give me a cigarette.
One of the things that I find interesting here is this relationship between the Maharaja and the Maharani and the George Brent character. He has been hired to come to paint a portrait of the Maharaja, which he's never completed, and yet they call on him, or she calls on him in this moment of dire need to sort of lead and be her whip to get things moving in the province.
Well, presumably they liked having Ransom around because he has a sense of humor and a sort of hint of cynicism, a very sort of English hint of cynicism.
And I suppose also because he is British and of the nobility, that he could bridge the gap between the local native rule and the British rule. It's interesting, we see Maria Uspensky smoking throughout the film, and unfortunately she died in 1949 as a result of a fire caused by smoking in bed.
Doing anything but just standing there. I'm sorry. Don't mind me. It's just my foul disposition.
Here's where we're seeing the Myrna Loy character slowly change. She's been selfish, sexy, thoughtless, and now she's beginning to sort of realize that maybe she does owe the people with whom she's now associated something, that she can contribute something to the rebuilding of Vanjipur.
He was glad too. I could tell. And he tried to smile, but he was too worn out. He just fell asleep in my arms like a little boy. I felt he belonged to me. I never wanted the night to end.
You have got it badly, haven't you?
We've mentioned the reissues and the remake, but of course there was also a Lux Radio Theatre version of The Rains Came in 1940 with George Brent and with Kay Francis in the Myrna Loy role.
Yes. And there's no use warning you.
No.
Look here, you don't expect him to marry you.
Well, not unless he wants to. Of course, if he would. But I'll do whatever he wants.
Myrna Loy's spoils of her career as an adventuress are on her wrist and not called attention to, but are there to be seen.
They do have some importance later in the film, but at the same time it's obviously showing that, you know, when she was escaping, she thought about her jewels.
You're a nice child. I'll do anything I can to help you.
Interesting little subtle touches. We see Myrna Loy cheating at some version of solitaire here. Here are the 40 elephants we've heard so much about.
All three of them.
Well, what's this? Barnum and Bailey's come to town?
Yeah, all right, eh?
What's this, an invasion?
Well, I'm afraid we'll have to turn our place into a barracks. So many of the children will...
The art direction, I think, is quite remarkable in the film. As with so many Fox films from this period, they really, except for some second unit process plates, never left the lot.
No, it's surprising. They did, as I said, they did go to India to record some music, but they never sort of considered going to India to shoot any background or any second unit.
I expect to have to feed an army. Next time, pick him up and show him where to clean up.
Oh, hurry up.
Hurry up now, go on out there. Well.
Yeah.
I bet you got your feet wet.
No, Ma, don't
Let me
worry.
see.
I'm all right.
I mean, just as I...
Another publicity story, although we're a little out of time here. There's been so much talk about Queen Victoria and the golden days of the British Empire, and George Brent reminisces while he watches the statue, and we just saw the statue of Queen Victoria rescue him when his boat went down. Supposedly there were 5 statues of Queen Victoria, 5 doubles, in case anything happened to the original statue.
The statue of Queen Victoria is actually quite important in the novel. After the floods and the earthquake, it's the statue of Queen Victoria alone that stands above the waterline in Vanjipur.
Best I've ever heard of. Are you ready? Every bed in the hospital's filled and not half enough doctors and nurses to go around. Now that Maharani sent out a call for volunteers.
Goodbye, Weena. Goodbye, sir.
Did you ever ride an elephant?
Bromfield used the novel to promote a Jeffersonian dream of a stable, enlightened society. He was a sort of strange mix. He was a liberal in that he was president of the emergency committee for the American wounded in Spain, repatriating members of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade after the Spanish Civil War, for which he was made a Chevalier of the Legion of Honor by France. But he was also extremely right-wing, and Lauren Bacall, in fact, writes in her autobiography that it was very dangerous to get Humphrey Bogart and Louis Bromfield talking about politics. You didn't want to be in the room at the same time.
But it's interesting in this melting pot where we have all these characters coming together, the royalty of the Indian society, of the British society. There's this differentiation between those people who can live and work together and those who are snobs and who are somehow less than ideal because they cannot fit into this pluralistic society.
What is she doing here?
She volunteered.
Why is she doing that kind of work?
She's had no experience.
It has been noted that Lady Eskeff, the Myrna Loy character, is named Edwina, which also happens to be the name of Lord Louis Mountbatten's wife, Edwina Mountbatten. And of course, Lord Louis Mountbatten was the last British Viceroy of India who supervised the partition of the country between India and Pakistan in the late 1940s. It has been suggested, in fact, that Lady Eskeff may well have been based on Lady Edwina Mountbatten. As both Edwina and Lord Louis Mountbatten are dead, I think we can risk libeling them in a little way by recalling some of the more interesting aspects of their private life. Lord Louis Mountbatten was gay, a close friend of Noel Coward, and in fact Noel Coward wrote In Which We Serve the film to honor his close friend Louis Mountbatten. Edwina Mountbatten had a penchant for gentlemen of color, and her longtime boyfriend was a Jamaican-born cabaret singer and pianist named Leslie Hutchinson, Hutch, who entertained Cafe Society in London in the 1930s and 1940s.
Laying a hand on their head doesn't really help much, except that it gives them courage. You see, they know I'm of high caste. For centuries, they've been made to step aside so their shadows won't fall on us and pollute us.
And again, here's an example of Tyrone Power as the new India going across the caste system to comfort the stricken in the flood.
It's interesting also the way his character has matured in the film. He seemed rather superficial, a little too young and dashing in the early scenes. And now he's been able to sort of deal with sort of major crisis, and he's come through strongly.
One of the curiosities, of course, of the construction of the story, as we shall see, the Power character has a role to play after the demise of the current regime in the province of Ranchapur. And there's nothing that's hinted about that before it actually comes up in conversation between Maria Spinskaya and George Brent later in the film.
One wonders almost, is sort of Tyrone Power their son? Because the way the Maharani decides that he's going to succeed her husband, it's almost as if he is the son, or at least the adopted son.
Well, he's certainly the substitute son, because she pointedly says she doesn't have any children, although she wishes that she did. Surprisingly, for as popular as he became, Tyrone Power had rocky early years in Hollywood. Didn't get many breaks at all, but director Henry King championed him. He, of course, at Fox became their top male star, appearing in films like Alexander's Ragtime Band and In Old Chicago and The Razor's Edge.
Just remember that you're in constant danger. Don't forget to use plenty of disinfectant. We mustn't let it...
Here, of course, he adopts a pencil-thin moustache, which was what George Brent was very famous for.
Yes, it's somewhat odd that they would have both men wearing mustaches.
Hedda Hopper claimed in her column that Tyrone Power's moustache is fake. You'll have to watch the film very closely and see if it sort of changes position at all from scene to scene.
Durga, got a call from the hospital for more linen, 250 pairs of sheets. This will give you authority to take what you want from the Rajputana Textile Company. If Mr. Motilal, the manager, objects, send him to me.
Yes, sir.
And I shall introduce him to my pet lions who will feed on his liver.
Yes, sir. Watch out. Watch out. I bring the brandy, sir.
Ah, the brandy.
You had mentioned earlier the premiere of the film, which took place at Grauman's Chinese Theatre on September 14th, 1939. Just about everybody associated with the film was there, with the exception of George Brent, who was away on location. Tyrone Power came with his sister Anne because his wife Annabella had returned to Europe to try and bring her mother to the United States. This was a very major premiere. Amongst the stars present were Claudette Colbert, George Burns and Gracie Allen, Linda Darnell, Basil Rathbone, Sonia Henney, Irene Dunn, producer Adolf Zucker, and director Henry King. And of course, yet again, we have another typical publicity stunt because Zanuck insured the premiere against rain for $10,000. The day after the premiere, the film was released to 250 theaters.
Not only in his official capacity, but as an old and sorrowing friend. May I add my own?
I am grateful to the Viceroy, but more than sympathy, I need cooperation.
We were talking earlier about the two Cameron, Burt Glennon, who started the film, and Arthur Miller, who finished it. One of the things in the studio system at that time, every cinematographer was expected to have his own lighting style, but equally expected to know how other cameramen lit, because on any given day they could be moved from picture to picture depending on illness or schedule.
But to what extent do you think that Clarence Brown dictated the lighting? Because it does strike me that this is so beautifully lit and it is reminiscent of a lot of Clarence Brown's films.
I think that certainly the scene that we described earlier with the cigarette between Myrna Loy and George Brent is a direct lift from Flesh and the Devil, so he certainly had a sense of what he wanted. But the film has the look of other 20th Century Fox films from the period.
What is Lady Esk doing at the hospital?
Every conceivable, filthy and drudging task.
Yes, I suppose Miss McDade would have seen to that. But why is she there?
The film was edited by Barbara McLean, who Zanuck considered one of the best editors in Hollywood, one of 7 or 8 women editors who were working in town at the time. She went on to become head of the Fox editorial department.
I can only hope that George Brent's portrait of the Maharani will look better than that portrait of the Maharaja.
Which I guess calls into question whether this is the portrait that he supposedly painted.
Well, no, wasn't he supposed to be painting her portrait? Unless he did this first.
Yes. Her portrait certainly was not completed according to the earlier scene, but he supposedly came to paint the Maharaja.
No.
No alien influence must enter his life. He must remain dedicated to his cause. Would it hurt him so much to give her up?
For a while, yes. But he's young. He'll get over it, I'm sure.
I want to do the right thing.
Maria Ospinskaya is probably best remembered for her role as the gypsy woman in The Wolfman.
She and Brenda Joyce actually were to appear together again, of course, in Tarzan and the Amazons, because Maria Ospinskaya plays the Queen of the Amazons.
Maria was a product of the Moscow Art Theater, came to the United States in 1922 and remained in the States. She supposedly made her debut in English at the age of 50, although apparently she was much older than she claimed. As with many actors, who were known as teachers. Her own film career was somewhat spotty, but she was known as one of the best acting teachers in the business at the time.
But so many of the teaching actresses and actors generally were character people. They were never leading ladies or leading men. I'm thinking of John Abbott, the British actor, who was also a character player and was probably more important for his teaching of acting.
And Jeff Corey and Stella Adler.
Nina Foch as
yes.
well.
How long since you've been to bed?
Oh, perhaps a day or two. I don't remember.
After you've seen Lady Escott, get some sleep. You've been a real help, believe me.
Come in. Hello, Tom.
Hello.
Ever tried to curl your hair without a curling iron?
No.
Alcohol's a precious commodity these days, not to be used for purposes of mere vanity. Sit down. On Satya's bed. She's my roommate, a Norch dancer. Been hearing dreadful things about you. Seems you've become a shockingly useful citizen.
Can't help myself. It's a conspiracy.
Why so glum?
Why so cheerful?
I'm young again, that's why. I feel exactly as I did the day of my first real dance.
And a scene like this, again, I think points to the strengths in the film, where the dialogue is both oblique and on point, and the setting complements what is going on in the action.
The one that's in the cabinet now spilled strawberry jam on it. I tried to scratch his eyes out. The authorities intervened.
To celebrate the end of shooting, Clarence Brown gave a party at his ranch in Calabasas on June 18th, 1939.
What do you mean?
The entire cast and crew were present, and it's interesting that George Brent brought along Betty Davis.
I won't go.
You'd better. She means it.
No, Tom. I thought it all out, and this time I know I'm right. I must be right. Believe me, Tom. I'm in love for the first time in my life. Completely, honestly in love.
I believe you.
So you can tell the Maharani I won't go.
She'll probably have you shot. She can, you know.
I'll risk it.
Two of Myrna Loy's best dramatic roles were at 20th Century Fox. In 1936, she was in a picture called To Marry with Love, which is the story of a marriage over a period of years, starting in the 20s and going into the Depression, which co-starred Warner Baxter.
It does seem to me there's far more substance to her role here than there is to some other parts she's played at MGM.
I'm on duty. Cheerio, Tom. You've done your duty like a good little soldier.
This whole sequence is played with quite remarkable subtlety.
And again, I think you see Brown's experience in silent film in that...
Because there is really no dialogue.
There's no dialogue to speak of, and yet you know exactly what's going on. It's very visual.
But it doesn't telescope the action. It doesn't make you say, hey, that glass of water, that glass. It's really beautifully underplayed and constructed.
the irony, of course, is that she does, as she's been told, use the disinfectant, but it's to no avail.
She dies in a way through self-sacrifice. There was no need for her to take over sort of the fanning of the patients as she does. The only discordant quality, literally, is the music, which I think is a little too melodramatic.
A little heavy, and also you can just hear some producers saying nobody's going to know what's going on unless she says the glass, and I'm sure they added that in post-production after the scene was shot.
Good morning. I couldn't sleep. I had to come and talk to you. Listen.
Oh, that's a good sign. It means that life is going on again.
It means we're going to win. Last night, for the first time, there were fewer new cases instead of more. You look tired.
I'm not really.
This is the only chance we have to talk to each other. It wasn't true what I said about not being able to sleep. I set the alarm clock.
You shouldn't. You get little enough rest.
There are all kinds of rests. This is better than sleeping. Tom tells me that you're leaving today.
Yes. By request.
It's probably just as well. I go through torture every moment because you're in danger here. Nothing must happen to you now.
Rama.
What's the matter?
Nothing. It just makes me so happy to hear you say that. I never thought when I first met you. It seemed so long ago.
Of course, there's a little bit of poetic license here. As a doctor, you think he might notice the sweat on her brow, but...
Well, he will in a few minutes when he holds her in his arms.
Not to the woman I knew then. No, I think you're someone different. Please don't think that I'm just being mystical and Indian, but I can't connect you with her. That woman I met at the Summer Palace, so shiny and glossy and so crafty for what she wanted. Oh, yes, I knew what you wanted. And I was tempted. That's why I stayed for a cup of lukewarm tea, which I hate. And you were trying so hard to make me believe you were respectable and inexperienced. But wait, I don't think much of respectability. I think a great deal more of truth. Maybe that's why I hesitated then. And later when I pretended I didn't find you exciting. Something held me back. I must have seen the other woman within you. The one that came here. scrubbed floors and emptied slop pails and fought nausea and weariness and fear.
Contemporary reviewers were not totally enthusiastic about the film. The New York Times announced that it appears to have defied translation to the screen. Edwin Shallot, the film critic for the Los Angeles Times, and believe me, back then the Los Angeles Times never made a film it didn't like. Edwin Shallot actually wrote, "That it is free from fault is too much to say, but the debits are well compensated for by the credits in this production."
Maybe in your heart you're laughing at me.
No. No.
And yet, I think, as an entertainment, it's a nearly perfect blending of drama, melodrama, action, romance, everything that Hollywood did best all in one picture.
You leave Rancho Paul?
Yes. Yes, we'll go to some other city where I can set up a practice. Calcutta, Madras, or the Malay states, where we can live our own lives together.
You leave all this, knowing what it's meant to you. Knowing what you do of me. No. Just hold me a little while.
Again, although he probably should have seen the sweat on her brow, the script and Clarence Brown opted to play the moment of discovery in a visual way where he embraces her and feels the heat from the fever.
No. No. I'm just tired.
Take over in the ward.
Very interesting, subtle things in the set, too. We've seen the earthquake and the flood and these, they're not called attention to, but these trees that have been brought in to prop up the walls in the background in the set. Very nice detail in the art direction.
Mary Nash is perhaps a little too melodramatic, a little too much of the stage in her performance, particularly here, I think.
But as we mentioned earlier, she really is from an earlier time, dating back to the early 1900s.
1903, yeah.
How is she?
It's also a moment that's designed to sum up her, you know, pining for the doctor.
Yeah, I mean, she's obviously jealous of Myrna Loy's presence. She sees Myrna Loy as a threat to her relationship to the doctor. And also, in a way, I suppose, a threat to the doctor's relationship to the province, to Rancho Paul.
I don't know what to do, Tom. I don't know what to do. She won't fight. She hasn't any will to live. I don't know what to do.
Steady.
I'm supposed to be a doctor. I'm supposed to help people to fight for life. And I want her to live more than I want to live myself. I tried to tell her that she must fight. I couldn't. I couldn't speak. I'm all gone inside. Stay with me, Tom. I need you.
Rama, this won't do. You've got to get a hold of yourself.
It's no use. I can't. We're different. Deep down, where it matters. I'm an Indian. I can't be calm and unemotional. I want to tear my clothes and wail like Banerjee.
You're not Banerjee. You're a man. You're a doctor.
No. I failed. I can't save her.
Rama.
And of course, the earlier melodramatic moment is echoed here in a purely symbolic scene where George Brent is the transitional figure from British rule keeping
a stiff upper lip.
Yes, keeping a stiff upper lip and encouraging the new India from reverting back to the old India, as Mr. Banerjee did earlier in the film.
Of course, what destroyed any possibility or any hope of a successful new India was the fact that there were two major religious groups in India, and this film, of course, only deals with one, the Hindu. There were no Muslims in this film, but it was because of India being an amalgam of Muslims and Hindus that the only solution was partition, the creation of East and West Pakistan and India, with East Pakistan eventually becoming Bangladesh.
And of course the disputed territory of Kashmir, disputed
which
to
still
this day.
to this day.
Died in Ranchpur during the great disaster of 1938.
Now, of course, we know why Myrna Loy has been carrying the family jewels around with her.
We like stories like that. I suppose this is the way it feels to repent and get religion. Giving away my worldly goods. Anyway, it's a nice feeling.
A very interesting speech, because she still doesn't seem to accept religion as the basis of her conversion, but she accepts the feeling.
Don't look so unhappy. I'm not.
Well, in a way, she's sacrificed herself for India. Her love of Safti has ultimately led to her sacrificing her life for modern India.
Although I think her sacrifice is strictly for him, not for the larger cause of India. And I think that's what the meaning of this speech is that she isn't really looking toward the larger goal, but just the personal interaction.
Have you got a ring, Fern? Does she like sapphires? There's a condition attached. You'll have to marry her. You said you'd do anything.
Yes, but I'd be no good for her.
Stop bragging. She's mad about it. She thinks you're a god. That's what you've always wanted. We have had such foul luck, you and I. But you've picked a winner at last.
And of course, this speech suggests that their earlier relationship was more important than it has seemed up until this point.
As soon as you're well, we'll get away from all this.
Of course.
I've thought it all out. We won't be running away from anything, because there won't be anybody else in the world but ourselves. We'll have each other.
Yeah.
Just you and I. Up to Kashmir, down the Ganges to Bengal, and then perhaps in a little boat from Calcutta.
The director Clarence Brown suggested to Myrna Loy that people die with their eyes open, and
which of course was quite unusual in the Hollywood film of this time.
Yes. It was also unusual to see somebody in a hospital without a bandage around their head at that time, which seemed to be the catch-all for whatever was ailing somebody.
This is also apparently the first film in which, since she'd become a star, that Myrna Loy died.
This time it has been built to stand as long as you live and your children.
And again, the suggestion here is that this new India is at hand. I'm not sure that the British at the time were quite so sure that the empire wouldn't last forever, but...
Well, certainly till the end of the Second World War, there was no suggestion that the British were going to leave India. It was really the Second World War that forced the British to decide to leave.
Nothing, Your Highness.
I mean, I think the British were quite shocked during the Second World War that an awful lot of Indians suddenly started siding with the Germans. They had always assumed that the Indians loved them, and suddenly they discovered they didn't. And in a way, here's Maria Spinskaya as the old India.
Retreating even before her death.
Scene, yeah. As far as I could ascertain, this is how the film was going to end on George Brent and Brenda Joyce, but then they brought back Tyrone Power in July 1939 and shot this final sequence. Presumably they decided Tyrone Power was a more dominant figure in the film and they needed a sort of more triumphant note on which to conclude.
Well, the whole ending is so many films, especially Fox films this period, you have sort of a symbolic curtain call with all the characters lined up for their last bow.
Yeah, a little difficult here because we've already lost Myrna Loy, but anyway. Well, Bob, it's been fun as always, and I'm glad the rains came. I only wish I could have got in that sort of famous line about the remake, The Rains of Ranchipur, that it never rains, but it ranchipurs.
Well, I'm glad you didn't get that in, as a matter of fact. I think that The Rains Came is one of the classic Hollywood films, really much better than the sum of its parts, and a real testament to what was best about Hollywood in the golden age.
And I think really a tribute to the major creative filmmaker, Darryl F. Zanuck.